Hello and welcome to Films and That. My name is Rob Turnbull.
And my name's Sam Hall.
And today we are looking at Grave of the Fireflies. Grave of the Fireflies follows two children as they struggle to survive in war-torn Japan. This review contains spoilers. So this is a film by Studio Ghibli, and it's not a Miyazaki film, it's a Isao Takahata film. Miyazaki does tend to go more towards the spiritual side and a lot of Japanese folklore, whereas this film, Grave of the Fireflies, tends to be about just two individual people just surviving in real world setting.
It still has that magical look to it. Extra real? Surreal? Not surreal, you know what I mean?
We're like stylistic.
Stylistic,
yeah. There's definitely a few moments that are just really kind of magical and beautiful. But then there's also other moments that are really horrific and just bring it down to the real world. The film follows two children, a teenage boy and his younger sister who's about 5. It's set during World War II and it starts off, they're in an air raid and their home and their city where they live in is just completely destroyed.
Yeah, it's about a process called firebombing, I think it's called, which was used by the Allies based on this sort of theory that if you heavily bomb civilian areas, that eventually the civilians will rise up against their own country just to try and, you know, bring peace about. So it highlights the more violent elements of the Allied campaign, which is something you might not learn in school if you're from one of the Allied countries of the war. I mean, not to say, you know, it doesn't shy away from the more unpleasant elements of Imperial Japan. I have heard this talked about as being a patriotic film. Would you say that could be the case? Consider the case? Well, I mean, I think it doesn't paint anyone in a particularly good light, does it? No,
I mean, I know what you mean about patriotic, like the main characters, he really wants to go off and fight for the empire, he keeps calling it, doesn't he? The Japanese empire. But at the same time, it does show that the system in Japan didn't support these people at the time, and they lost out from how they were treated by their country, basically.
Yeah. The two children's mother dies. Their father is fighting in the war, he's in the Navy, and they're effectively orphaned as a result of this, as a result of the mother dying. Dies in a particularly unpleasant and horrific way. You don't actually see it, but you see the result of it, and it's the first sort of shock of the film, I'd say. Yeah,
but that's what's interesting about the film, and what I liked about it is that a lot of the kind of more melodramatic elements are stripped away, and a lot of things happen off screen, like the mother dying, like you don't see their house burn down because they weren't there to witness it. And then there's a line that one of them says, "Oh, I guess our house burnt down then." It's like, yeah, well, I can't see it anywhere. But it's just like, you wouldn't normally see that in a kind of cartoon, I wouldn't have thought. You would have seen more melodramatic elements. They go to live with their aunt, who doesn't really want them there, I get the impression. It's kind of seen as a burden upon her.
If there's a villain of the film, she's quite a, you know, sort of wicked witch sort of aunt, isn't she? She starts out pleasant enough. She's obsessed with the rationing. She's constantly talking about how lazy they are, despite the fact that they're kids. You know, one of them is 4 or 5. You know, but she's constantly ripping into them and saying, "You're a burden on me," basically making them feel incredibly unwelcome. But that's just the start of it, I feel, isn't it? Because it's not just her. She's representative of society as a whole, because absolutely everyone they see for help is dismissive and unhelpful and is, you know, just saying, "We're all in the same boat, you know, we've got to look after yourself." And that there's that kind of feeling of the kind of cruel nature of life, of how you should be in it for yourself. There's no heavenly body to look after you. And I felt like that was a kind of summarising of the film, you know, that was what all the characters and pretty much everything but the environment, really, and the nature, you know, because that was what brought them sort of peace, wasn't it? It was the society and the people that made their lives so difficult. But nature itself, you know, that's what kept them going, more or less.
So once they get out of society, once they go and live off on their own, that's when they seem to have a lot more fun and be happier. Because there are actually a few moments of happiness and kind of wonder dotted throughout this film. Like there's a bit when they're on
they
the
need
beach.
it, I think, don't they? Yeah.
A bit where they're on the beach and they're playing, and then other people are just looking at them and they don't know why they're doing that. But so they leave the aunts because Sita's finally had enough of how she's treating them. She's not feeding them like what he feels that he is owed, because they sell their mother's possessions to get rice, but then the aunt keeps a lot of the rice for herself.
Yeah. So
then Sita gets frustrated at this, and then he leaves. He wants to kind of go out and prove that he can survive and he can live on his own. And they go and live in a mine, like an abandoned mine, don't they, by a lake?
No, it's a shelter, isn't it?
Is it like an area?
A bomb shelter,
okay.
yeah.
But Sita's woefully irresponsible, and he's not equipped to kind of look after this little girl, is he? There's a bit when Setsuko leaves her toothbrush at her aunt's house, and his response to this is, well, just don't brush your teeth then. That's his parenting skills.
The second half of the film is very much a kind of tale of dealing with starvation, essentially, isn't it? And that kind of the slow, unpleasant death, the internal death. Because physically, they're still living, they're still alive, they're still able to work and to do things, but they just haven't got, there's not enough food as it is, as they keep on hearing from people. Rationing is got to breaking point, and they're effectively just two homeless people now, two homeless children, and nobody's willing to help them, so there's only one way that can go, really. Yeah,
so they become more and more desperate. Sita goes and starts stealing food during the air raid, which I thought was particularly kind of the antithesis of the Blitz spirit. So he's waiting for the bombs to fall, and then he's going and stealing stuff from people's houses just to feed his sister. But he ultimately can't manage it, and Setsuko eventually dies of malnutrition.
And would you like to talk about that kind of moment, the kind of poignant moment of that?
Well, again, it's not a melodramatic moment, is it? She kind of just is really weak, and then there's a line where Sita goes, she never woke up after that. And then that's it. That's how it's broken to us that she died. It's very matter of fact.
There's very little, like you say, melodrama. And I think a lot of that comes from Sita and Setsuko themselves. Even Setsuko, as a very young girl, has to really sort of reel it in and just accept the hand that they're dealt, try and overcome the issue. But the problem is that all the willpower in the world isn't going to change the fact that they're not eating properly.
There's a nice moment when she makes rice balls out of mud or something.
Well, you say nice moment,
but it's a sweet thing from her perspective. She's like, "Oh, I made some food." Like she's kind of making do with what she got.
This is moments before she dies.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. It's kind of altruistic at that point, and kind of hopeful rather than being depressed by the situation and knowing that you're going to die and being upset by that. She's still kind of clinging to the thing where it's kind of play for her.
Yeah, I see like that as a sort of dramatic technique, to sort of give almost bring it up to sort of sainthood, So there's this sort of thing about stoicism, I think, and that comes through. And like you say, like altruistic, really trying to make the best of a terrible situation.
And one of my favourite moments is the Firefly moment. Because it's dark in their little hut, cave thing, whatever it is, they get a load of fireflies and they bring them in.
And they use netting to kind of prevent them from leaving the
and
shelter.
There's this beautiful moment of all these like twinkling little lights in their little cave, and Setsuko is kind of taken aback by this, but then the morning comes and all these bugs have died, and she's just like burying them in a grave, and it's just such a hitting home, this realism coming back.
I felt like that was probably the most poignant and upsetting scenes, because that Sita immediately then makes a connection with these dead bugs being sort of shoveled and buried into the ground, with the image of seeing his mother being thrown onto a pile of dead bodies and torched. That was how they had to deal with it, and there was so many dead bodies, So that's the point, I think, where the kind of the sadness of the idea that the film really sort of peaks. because you get the sense pretty much from the beginning that this is how everything was going to turn out. Everything is very bleak from the word go, and you know that it's not going to end well for either of them.
The very, very first scene, they're both ghosts, aren't they? And the very first line is Sata saying, "Oh, this is when I died." So you know both of them died from the very first thing, and it's just this slow, somber kind of death march happening, isn't it? You know how it's going to happen.
It's the tragedy. I guess that could be like savouring the moments, you know, even when you know that tragedy awaits. Of course, as you said, it's based on a real story in the real life. The tragic figure that Sata is based on survived and wrote a book, so not as tragic as the film.
But to alleviate his guilt, because I read somewhere that he fed himself before he fed his two sisters, and then they both died of malnutrition. So it's obviously something that's played heavily on him for his entire life, as it would do. Yeah, so it's very tragic. And this is something I wanted to bring up, actually. Like, why would you tell this story in an animation? Because I understand why you would tell something like Finding Nemo or Toy Story as an animation, because you can't tell those stories in live action. But why do you think this went into something like Studio Ghibli's department and they made it into an animation? Why do you think that happened?
I mean, I don't know the answer, to be honest, but I think sometimes you can get more out of that sort of situation. You're more likely to find the beauty of it. In something like a Ken Loach film, you know, you rarely sort of get the beauty. It's all about, it's political, it's hammering at home, you know, the tragedy of the situation, you know. Whereas in this, it's much more, it's almost spiritual. That's why it's animated, you know, because the animation can enhance that aspect of it, you know, the play, you know, and also, you know, animation is associated with children.
Yeah, but it's not a film for children, not because of violence or swearing, but just because it's just so depressing.
Yeah, no, my sister was asking me about it. I said, I showed Poignant to my son yesterday. I thought that was nice. He said, what do you think of this? I said, don't show this to him. Not if you've got a heart.
Yeah, it is one of the saddest films I've ever seen. What do you think?
Well, you've bombarded me with this, really, haven't you? Because as long as I've known you, we've seen Requiem for a Dream together, we've seen Dancer in the Dark together. You know, isn't that enough depressing films for one lifetime? And then you recommend this to me.
The other two weren't my idea, though.
True.
I was just...
But then we went through that together. I thought you'd understand.
So, what did you think of Grave of the Fireflies?
Yeah, I can't fault the film. You know, it is one of the more memorable of Studio Ghibli stuff, but it is just such a hard watch. It's very difficult. I watched it twice, and I was very reluctant to watch it the second time.
Yeah,
because it was so heavy. You know, I think perhaps because it was about children suffering. You know, it's not something that anyone really has to go through. But at the same time, there's that argument you say, well, it kind of needs to be watched in a way, doesn't it? Sometimes you need that kind of reality, you know, because a lot of people talk about, well, our lives are bad enough, we need more escapism. But to be honest, I think there's enough escapism to go around at the moment, you know, especially with Marvel, you know, at the height of its power. Yeah. You know, I think there's enough escapism to go around. We need a bit of a dose of reality every now and then.
That's a fair point. And there are beautiful moments, though, throughout the film. And that does keep you invested. Like the thing with the sweets, the fruit drops that keeps coming back. It's this little treat that they give themselves each time. And when they start running out, they start filling it with water, so they have like sweet water. And it's a really kind of hopeful view on life, even though things are depressing and falling apart around you. Yeah. And I think that just make the film really special.
I guess in that sense, then, it can be seen as something like, you know, very sort of humanist, you know, like overcoming even the most dire of situations.
that's it for this time of Films on That. Thanks for watching and subscribing. We'll see you next time.
Sayonara. That's goodbye in Japan, isn't it? Japanese?
Probably.
Yeah.